Welcome to Talking Africa, the latest in a new series here on Arise News, a special weekly edition of Africa Wrap, where we take time to reflect on the fortunes and affairs of the emerging continent within its own countries and across the world in an hour of conversation with African commentators and thought leaders. Time now to welcome my first guest. Michael Burleigh is an author and historian. He's been Professor of History at Washington and Lee University in Virginia and visiting professor at Stanford. He's also a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society here in London. He's here today because of his research and writings on the Islamist extremist groups currently at the heart of the devastating insurgency taking place across so much of Africa. Welcome. Let's start with Boko Haram, which hit the world's headlines across this last year, but they are an old enemy, aren't they?
Yes, they've been around for some time, but they seem to have become more and more virulent. And I guess because they're becoming more practiced at exploiting social media and propaganda, partly, I suspect, because of the influence of ISIS, you'll be more and more aware of them.
And they started where? Looking for what?
Well, they're based in northern Nigeria, and they essentially want to create a rigorous Sharia state within northern Nigeria. There is talk of them wishing to expand into some of the neighbouring states, particularly Cameroon and Niger, and you know, it's very, very serious.
So across the last 6 years or so, Nigeria has been fighting this insurgency against Boko Haram, and it doesn't appear to have been particularly effective. What do you put that down to?
Well, I guess it's a long way away from where the political power and the wealth are in Nigeria, so, you know, although it seems strange to say it, I mean, perhaps people further in the south or the governing elite of Nigeria are not that bothered by it, to be perfectly frank about it. And then secondly, although on paper Nigeria has a very well-financed military operation, you know, you don't know to what extent what the budget says is actually what the soldiers on the ground get in their pay packet. And soldiers, as we know from what's happened in Iraq last summer, where, you know, on paper a very big Iraqi national army, but, for example, there were 50,000 soldiers on the books where the generals, these were fictitious people, and the generals were just stealing the pay packets. So unless a big budget translates into happy soldiers, contented soldiers, and therefore motivated soldiers, you're not going to be fighting people who also, of course, are utterly ferocious and ruthless.
Over this last year or so, there has been talk and rumours of perhaps collusion between the political establishment in Nigeria and Boko Haram. Does that sort of talk have any credibility as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think last year in Nigeria they sentenced 12 very senior army officers for all sorts of offences, you know, like supplying them with ammunition and, you know, money, etc., etc. They were jailed. I mean, this is far more serious than whether, you know, a couple of dozen Nigerian squaddies just run for it or decide they're not going to fight them, and then, you know, they get executed for mutiny, of course.
So Nigeria's army says it killed more than 300 Boko Haram fighters during Operation this week. They say weapons and equipment have also been captured and destroyed. How significant do you think that is as a sign of real progress to try and control this insurgency?
Well, some people would be quite sceptical about the statistics. You know, did we see the 300 people laid out dead on the ground? And with all these statistics, I mean, it's like the Americans claiming that since last August they've killed about 6,000 ISIS people in total in Iraq and Syria. But the key thing to remember is that unless that's greater than their recruitment rate, you know, what are you achieving?
So tell us about recruitment, because who is joining Boko Haram? Who are they signing up, and why are these people signing up to them?
You're talking about disadvantaged, perhaps, or angry, equally, young men. And if Boko Haram is offering them a salary or, you know, paying them a monthly wage, which all these groups do, and which shouldn't be left out of the equation, you know, this is why they're stealing large amounts of money and why they also need ransoms from kidnappings, which they get, you know, I mean, apparently they get about $10 million a year or something from kidnap ransoms. So there's a financial incentive in it. And then also they offer a very, very simplistic understanding of the world. You know, it's them and us. And that allegedly the Islamic world is under threat from the Crusaders, as they would call them, or whatever. Although, you know, in the case of China, they would have to be Chinese Crusaders, wouldn't they? And this obviously appeals to some people.
So does this mean then that young men sort of grow up and live and die within Boko Haram?
Yeah, effectively. I mean, the other thing they're doing is, of course, is forced conscription. So they turn up in a place and actually forcibly, you know, recruit you into Boko Haram, and the alternative is that you'll get killed.
So far, Cameroon seems to have been relatively successful in repelling Boko attacks, despite having a much smaller army than Nigeria. Why do you think that is?
Perhaps it's got better morale. It's also being reinforced from Chad. I mean, there are Chadian troops who are an effective fighting force, relatively speaking, who are in Cameroon, and you know, they're also defending their own country, obviously, from an external incursion.
So in the next 5 weeks, Nigeria is talking about having to create a security situation in which elections can be held. Do you think it is credible that they can do that?
I would find that very doubtful. I mean, you're talking now about an area the size of Belgium that is, you know, I wouldn't say that Boko Haram are in control of it, but they're certainly ranging around it, you know, with free will, as it were. And then there's huge numbers of potential voters who don't have biometric identification cards or whatever, and also who are displaced, not registered, and won't physically be able to vote. So,
briefly then, in terms of solutions and dealings with this, obviously the answer is not just military. What else needs to be done?
No, I think that military is very important. I mean, as I said, that in all these cases, whether it's them, whether it's ISIS, whether it's Al-Shabab, unless you're killing them at a faster rate than they're recruiting, you're not making much progress. There's certainly that. But what are the alternatives? Well, I mean, are you going to negotiate with people who, you know, who put 30 people in a cage and set fire to them? I mean, what are we going to negotiate about, any of us? There is nothing to talk about. I mean, past terrorist movements, you could say, well, they have reasonable demands, say they want a separate state, or they want independence, or this, that, and the other. These are things you can sit down and negotiate about. But you can't negotiate with people who actually want to abolish your entire way of life or your religious identity and enslave all your children. What are you going to talk about?
We'll take a very short break there, but when we come back, we'll leave Nigeria and move to Kenya, where the group Al-Shabab continues its campaign of terror, and we'll ask Michael Burleigh for his thoughts on how governments and the military in East Africa are tackling that threat. Do please stay with us.
The best way to predict the future is to create it. There's a special breed of achievers out there called tomorrow's people. They imagine what will be and strive to make it happen. They refuse to wait for the future. Tomorrow bends and conforms to their ideas. At Access Bank, we share the same sentiments. Our mantra for success is simple: speed, service, and security. Tomorrow's people own the future because they keep the world turning. That is the power of taking tomorrow.
Welcome back to Talking Africa here on Arise News as we continue the conversation with my guest this week, the historian and author Michael Burleigh, an expert on the evolution of the Islamist insurgencies now so regularly causing death, displacement and major political unrest in so many African nations. So let's move now to Kenya and Al-Shabab, Al-Shabab meaning the youth in Arabic. Where did it come from?
Well, there's, you know, basically because Somalia has become a completely failed state, that you know, it's been subject to warlords and the central government has collapsed, and therefore it's ideal in a way for the genesis of these sorts of movements. And I suppose one thing, rather like the Afghan Taliban, which also emerged after a failed state and a civil war, these people claim that they're going to restore order, you know, to root out corrupt warlordism, impose the reign of justice, and that only Islam and the Sharia law can actually do that.
And is that what Al-Shabab was promising?
Yeah, sure.
And so essentially you're saying that they were just the biggest, meanest group that came out of that chaos?
Yes, they were. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in all of this of you know, that the strongest horse gets bigger in all of these terrorist groups. I mean, you can see that in the way that ISIS has eclipsed Al-Qaeda. You know, Al-Qaeda, although it still exists in the world, its leaders are very circumscribed in what they can do. I mean, you know, they're probably bent on daily survival because the Americans are out to kill them, amongst others. Whereas, you know, Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, they've had terrific military success in the short term since last summer. I mean, it's like a sort of great big rampage. And as long as that happens, and they're very, very effective on social media and propaganda, then other groups will be attracted to them and will want to affiliate with them. I mean, as has happened with Boko Haram, I mean, they haven't quite formally joined with them, but they've acknowledged, you know, they're a superior type of terrorist, and the Al-Shabab in Somalia, they've also done that, plus groups in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, all over the place, and not to speak of lone wolf or jihadist sympathisers all over Europe.
And we talked about Boko Haram looking to establish their caliphate. Does Al-Shabab, is there a sort of philosophical underpinning, or is this just pure gangsterism?
It hasn't quite gone as far as saying that it wants to establish a caliphate, nor, incidentally, has Al-Qaeda. That's why they fell out with ISIS, if you want to know the technical reason. They never actually did establish a caliphate, partly because there was somebody there with a claim to be one, which was Mullah Omar and the Afghan Taliban. I don't think even he established a caliphate, if I'm right. I don't think he presumed to do that. So Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, is the first one to actually say this is a caliphate, and then Boko Haram have followed him down that path.
And Al-Shabab, this is just about grabbing as much as we can, as fast as we can? I
think that's very much part of it, yes.
And there are numerous reports of foreign jihadis going to Somalia to try and help Al-Shabab, and the group has claimed to be allied with Al-Qaeda. So to what extent is international support important to them?
Well, like all these, I mean, well, less so actually. I mean, Boko Haram, as far as anybody knows, doesn't have any international. I mean, there are no, you know, jihadis going from, I don't know, Western Europe to go and fight with Boko Haram. I mean, it doesn't seem to do that. And so far, until very recently, it didn't seem to have any international ambitions outside Nigeria, although that has now recently changed. And, you know, the leader of Boko Haram has been making dire threats against America and saying, we'll turn up in America, you know, we're coming there. That's probably a bit hubristic. Al-Shabab, obviously, there's a big Somali diaspora across the world, you know, so you've got, perplexingly, you've got people who went to live in, I don't know, Minneapolis, for example, in the United States, who were accepted as asylum seekers or refugees and had all the benefits of living in the United States, and then when they hit the age of 18 or 20, they suddenly disappear and go and join Al-Shabab.
And again, is that about money and a regular wage? Because at least with Boko Haram, if you're talking about something to believe in, you might understand why foreign people might go and join that particular gang, if you like. But Al-Shabab, if this is just criminal, what is causing people to cross continents to join them?
Well, it's radical Islam. You know, they feel that they want to take part in the jihad against.
So there is a philosophical.
Oh yeah, of course there is. Yeah, it's not just about. Well, you know, in a way, it's also things like people wanting adventure in a very curious way, and this is quite a subtle point. You know, many would-be jihadis are joining it because of its liberating potential. I mean, if you think about it, supposing you're somebody from a very traditional family background and your parents want you to marry your you know, second cousin in a village back in Pakistan who you've never met in your life. If you join ISIS, you have a pick of all those rather attractive Western jihadi girls who've left Bradford or Birmingham, because there's a lot of young girls have gone to fight with ISIS or join ISIS. And then not to speak of all the Christian or Yazidi or whatever girls who've been abducted, who now become your sexual slaves. I mean, what's not to like from their point of view?
So 4 years ago, jihadism, predominantly I suppose in the form of Al-Qaeda, was widely believed to be dead or dying.
Yeah. Now
there's been this resurgence. Why?
Well, because it's like sort of cancer in the sense it metastasizes all the time, and you know, Al-Qaeda hasn't gone away. It's still capable of inspiring people, mounting attacks, you know, often quite sophisticated ones through its affiliates in Yemen. But there is this new kid on the block, which is very, very dynamic, very, very aggressive, and is very militarily successful. Although that isn't a mystery, it's actually because there are two former Saddam Hussein generals are giving them tactical instructions in how to fight. That's why ISIS swept all over out of Syria into northern Iraq last summer so quickly, because they'd been instructed in how to do it.
And how is Kenya doing in terms of dealing with Al-Shabab?
Well, that's an interesting case because it shows you, you know, a very effective example of the African Union actually intervening. And, you know, it's not marvellously resourced. I have a lot of time for that. So you've got soldiers from Uganda, Kenya, Burundi, who, you know, with very good generals, so they sat down in the middle of Mogadishu and defended it and fought them off, with not anything like the resources or the intelligence and surveillance capabilities that the Americans bring to the party. So, you know, take your hat off to them. They've actually, you know, dislodged them from Mogadishu. They've pushed them out back into the countryside, and this, you know, it's quite praiseworthy. One wonders, well, you'd like to see something very similar happen in northern Nigeria with the neighbours and the Nigerian army, and let's not forget the local people who are brave enough to actually try and expel these people from their towns, you know, the sort of ad hoc militia groups, and you hope they would work together with a bit of perhaps intelligence and surveillance help from the United States.
Michael Burleigh, thank you for now. Time for another short break, but when we come back, we'll move north to Libya and the war being waged by Islamic State.
Wherever and whatever your banking needs, Guarantee Trust Bank will be there, now and into the future. Because you're at the heart of everything we do. Guarantee Trust Bank, proudly African, truly international.
Welcome back to Talking Africa here on Arise News as we continue the conversation with my guest this week, author and historian Michael Burleigh. So, Michael, we've talked about your writings and your research into Boko Haram in West Africa, about Al-Shabab in East Africa. Let's move north now to Libya and discuss the influence of Islamic State as we move into the rest of this year. And we'll start with the beheading of the Coptic Christians who'd come to Libya from Egypt as guest workers this week. Egypt responded by sending in fighter bombers to bomb IS positions in Libya. Is that retribution? Is it likely to be effective?
Well, I think we underestimate the extent to which this was a shocking event for Egyptians. you know, that number of people just being taken out to a beach and having their throats cut and their heads cut off is pretty shocking. And, you know, the Egyptian president really wouldn't have had much alternative. And there's been a lot of external air operations, already involving Egypt and the United Arab Emirates. They bombed jihadist positions before in Libya. You know, they did it a few months ago. So it's not entirely out of the ordinary.
And so now most of the international headlines concern Islamic State. Has the world sort of caught up late to the threat that Islamic State is posing?
Well, I think in the case of Libya, people took their eye off the ball a bit. You know, they didn't quite, it's so complicated, they sort of neglected it and then focused on the horrors that were unfolding in northern Iraq and northern Syria, you know, which is truly terrifying. I mean, what's been going on there. But of course, they neglected the fact that Libya is, again, an ideal failed state sort of situation in which any sort of armed group can prosper, and it's completely awash with weapons, whether from the Gaddafi era or from the NATO intervention in 2011, where, you know, I know British SAS officers who were in Libya in 2011 helping the rebels against Gaddafi with communications and arming them, etc. And, you know, even they will tell you quite frankly that the idea that you can just introduce weapons into a situation and they won't pass to people you don't want the weapons to go to is totally, you know, fantasy land.
And so in terms of the way that Islamic State is now operating in Libya, what are we seeing there? Are we seeing a faction that was already there growing and now affiliating to Islamic State, or are we seeing Islamic State moving into that
well, it's a combination of both, because, you know, there were already a very high number of Libyan jihadis had joined Islamic State. So then they go back as representatives of Islamic State and they persuade pre-existing groups, and there's plenty of radical jihadis in Libya already, to, you know, affiliate themselves or to pay homage, is the technical term they would use, to the leader of Islamic State. And at the moment they've got one or two towns on the coast like Derna and Sirte where this massacre happened in the latter case. And they're threatening to do all sorts of things. I mean, the latest thing which one of their leaders has suggested is, I mean, Libya is already a source of migrants because there's no border controls in Libya. It's all collapsed. They're saying that they might actually deliberately flood Europe, not just with more refugees, I mean, shove people out on a sinking boat, but actually put terrorists in there who can then get into southern Europe with their Kalashnikovs and shoot down a few, you know, dozen people in Rome, for example.
How credible do you think that is?
Well, if they're thinking about it, who's to say?
So what's interesting about this is you bring this particular fight to Libya, just 500 miles from Italy, and there's, as you say, there's already this flow of migrants there. Is this now a problem to which Europe and the Western world needs to pay more attention?
Well, it should have paid more attention all along, but it's very revealing that when the European Union set up a border agency to police the borders of the whole European Union, for what you might call pork barrel politics reasons, they based it in Warsaw, on the grounds that the Poles didn't have enough international institutions, or European institutions, so they put this thing in Warsaw, whereas, of course, where you need it is somewhere like Malta or Cyprus, because that's where, you know, mass migration is going to come from.
So if you're going to deal with Islamic State in Libya, as you say, the country's falling apart, no useful national army then, how do you do that? Do you put forces in behind the internationally recognised government in Syria? Do you just go in as an external agency and clean it up? What do you do?
Nobody is going to intervene in Libya. They'll all sit down and talk about it. But nobody is going to intervene in Libya.
Ever at all, or until what?
Well, for a very long time. I think once bitten, twice shy. And it's such a crazy, confused situation. And I don't think beyond, you know, there's been some talk about the Egyptian army intervening. I mean, first of all, the Egyptian army is you know, not as strong as it seems on paper for reasons which are quite similar to the Nigerian army. And then secondly, they're fighting a very intense insurgency in the Sinai Peninsula, where there's more ISIS-linked jihadists, you know, the area between Egypt and Gaza and Israel. So that's, you know, they're losing some dozens of men every week in bomb attacks and gun attacks. So, and then of course, you know, the government has decided to completely suppress the Muslim Brotherhood and others. So it needs forces domestically to maintain order. They've got to, you know, they have a problem there, even though the government is a popularly elected authoritarian government. Nonetheless, it's got a lot of opposition domestically. So the idea of invading Libya, to go and cross Libya to destroy some nests of jihadists, is completely improbable.
And no point looking to the Libyan government to do anything about this?
Well, the Libyan government, such as it, well, there's actually two governments. There's one in Tripoli and there's one in Baida in the west, which occupies a tiny pocket in the northeast corner of Libya next to Egypt. And then on top of all this, you won't get any, although Algeria, which is on the other side, is intensely concerned about jihadism in Libya and how that can contaminate Algeria, I don't think you're going to see much cooperation between the government in Algeria and the government in Egypt to deal with this.
So, we've looked then at Boko Haram, we've looked at Al-Shabab, and now Islamic State. It would be quite easy. I want to ask you if it would be sensible to try and sort of link all the three and see this thing as sort of moving as some sort of contagion across the continent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't overrate the connections between all of these different entities, although for the reasons I mentioned earlier, you know, ISIS will exert an influence on these groups just because it's successful. The day it ceases to be so successful, you know, when it's defeated, for example, you know, after 150 days, it was destroyed and pushed out of the town of Kobane in northern Syria, and they lost over 1,000 men apparently in that conflict with the Kurds. Then some of the gloss goes off the product, the brand. I mean, you have to see these things very much in terms of brands like Coca-Cola or Nike or, you know, Tag Heuer watches. And what the aim of policy should be, apart from killing people, these people, should be to take the luster off the brand. You need to discredit and destroy the brand.
Michael Burleigh, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much. My thanks to our guest, the historian Michael Burleigh. Stay with us to meet this week's Talking Africa panel as we look back at the week that's been, the big stories, the big issues. We continue the conversation in London. Stay here after this break.
There is a reason Africa is called the new frontier. What was once potential is now an opportunity ready to be seized. Once revered for our resources, today's wealth lies in our people. People who build the cities that shape the future. People who know an idea in one place means business in another. A generation for whom technology means there are no borders, no boundaries. We are the new lions in a brave new world, kings of the urban jungle. And there's a bank that puts the world in our pocket and the future in our hands. UBA, Africa's global bank.
Welcome back to Talking Africa with me, Phil Gale, picking up the conversation. This programme is the latest in a new series here on Arise News, a special weekly edition of Africa Wrap, where we take time to reflect on the fortunes and affairs of the emerging continent within its own countries and across the world in an hour of conversation with African commentators and thought leaders. I'm joined now by Temitope Alode, who's a terrorism expert and security strategist with deep experience across Africa. Also here, Princess Dayon Adedoyin Salarin, granddaughter of Oba William Christopher Adedoyin II, the Akarigbo of Saguma in Nigeria. She's chair of the international charity Girl Child Network worldwide. So thanks to both of you for coming in.
Thank you.
We're going to look back now at some of the major themes and big stories that have been coming out of Africa this last week. And we'll start with the growing row in South Africa over the way protests during President Jacob Zuma's State of the Nation address were handled. A debate this week that followed last week's unprecedented scenes in the Pretoria Parliament. Armed police were called in, economic freedom fighter MPs were thrown out, and MPs from the official opposition walked out in disgust. And this is the week when the opposition Democratic Alliance leader, Mmusi Maimane, took to the podium during the State of the Nation debate to unload. And he certainly did that. Have a listen.
We need to become the nation that President Nelson Mandela helped us believe we could become. A place of hope, prosperity, selfless leadership, and mutual respect. We've allowed those in power to become bigger than our institutions, breaking them down bit by bit. We have indeed allowed one powerful man to get away with too much for far too long. For you, Honorable President, are not an honorable man. You're a broken man presiding over a broken society. See, you're willing to break every democratic institution to try and fix the legal predicament you find yourself in. You're willing to break this parliament if it means escaping accountability for the wrongs you have done. You see, on Thursday afternoon, outside this very house, members of parliament were being arrested and assaulted by your riot police. This was more than an assault on members of parliament. It was an assault on the very foundations of our democracy, honorable members. You laughed while the people of South Africa cried for their beloved country. You laughed while trampling Madiba's legacy in the very week that we celebrated 25 years of his release. Honorable President, we will never, ever forgive you for what you did on that day.
Wow, clearly angry, Mmusi Maimane, telling President Zuma there, you are a broken man presiding over a broken society. Hyperbole, or is he onto something?
He is, because since 2009, we've seen a gradual controversial precedent. I'll say it's a parasite to ANC, you know, to put it is, because at the moment they are losing votes. They, you know, the last election, they dropped down. Of course, we know that they just dropped down by some couple of maybe 200,000, but if this goes on, they need to choose between whether to support him on a short run, you know, and lose everything they've actually fought for, you know, or, you know, just get rid of him and maintain, you know, because ANC is losing because of all the corruption and allegations that have beset his administration. Is more of in fact, there's so many ways to describe but the challenge is it's a serious issue for ANC.
Is this the way you see this, Princess Dayon? Do you see Zuma as a liability?
He is a liability.
Liability.
He has become a liability. He hasn't lived up to what people expected, especially, you know, when you think of Madiba that, you know, that left that position, and then the Kofi Annan. Sorry.
I don't know. Let me just skip me now.
President.
The former president before.
The former president.
Thabo
Mbeki. So even he had a little bit of problems, but at least he was still able to hold sway. Now, this Zuma man, maybe we could actually just say he's similar to our own Jonathan Goodluck in a funny kind of way. It's like, does he really know what it is to be a leader?
All right. Oh, so moving beyond the man, how damaging was what happened in Parliament to South Africa as a nation in terms of its international reputation? You saw fights and police in Parliament there. How damaging is that?
Very, very damaging. Extremely damaging, I would say. And also, I mean, when we say, even though at times when they say, oh, South Africa, sometimes they say, oh, they're not really part of Africa. When it comes to negativity, they become part of Africa. Yeah. They are, you know, they are part of Africa, whether they like it or not. And that was very negative on the total outlook on an international scale.
So a couple of things going on here. On the one hand, you have Zuma appearing to move in the direction that so many elected leaders in Africa have, gathering power to himself,
yes.
More than a whiff of corruption around him. Yep. But on the other hand, what we also have is what appears to be a maturing democracy where the ANC, having taken South Africa out of apartheid, yeah. we now have young voters who just see old and maybe corrupt men yeah. leading them. So is the next election when things will turn? Yeah,
definitely, because what we're seeing now is that the Democratic Alliance, they are actually making strides. They're moving. ANC still has that majority, because what we've seen is that even with all the changes, the people have not actually moved away from the political party. Of course, AD got some moved up. The other party, the third party, I think Economic Freedom Fighters, they actually got about 7% vote. And this is a move. It's good for democracy that there are other people coming up and challenging things. But for ANC, because of the history they have, because of what they stood for, it's very, very important that they put their house in order and ensure that they address this issue.
So, Princess Diane, where are you? Democratic Alliance as a force to match the ANC? Much chance?
It's not a lot of chance, I don't think. The ANC is like an institution. The ANC was formed probably not as a political party. It was more as a tool to get them out of apartheid and the oppressive situation they were in at the time. And it was also like a big family, and they had very deep grassroots connections. Yeah. That is why, as Tokwe said, it's a little bit difficult to wrench power out of their hands, because the grassroots people totally believe in the ANC. Yeah. The founding fathers and some of the mothers that fought, they were all part of the ANC.
Well, let's talk about the founding fathers. In 25 years now since Nelson Mandela was released from prison, what do you think he would make of of today's South Africa?
He'll probably be disgusted.
That strong?
Yeah. Yes.
Because we've not seen a lot of change. Because when you actually look at some of the accusations against Jacob Zuma and some of the things, people are still living in sheds. There's not been a transfer, an economic transfer. And if I could actually give a bold political prophecy, the challenge we have here is that they have a grassroots and they have a strong support at the grassroots, yes. And these people are still there. So in the next 15 years, ANC will still have that stronghold, but they will be encroaching on it gradually by other political parties or other actors actually coming out of ANC, and that is not good for them.
All right, time for a quick break. For now, Temitope and Princess Diane, stay with us. You're watching Talking Africa on Arise. Welcome back to Talking Africa here on Arise News as we continue conversation with my guests this week. Temitope Alode is a terrorism expert and security strategist with deep experience across Africa. With me as well is Nigerian Princess Dayon Adedayon Solarin, who's chair of the international charity Girl Child Network Worldwide. Now, Cairo's urban landscape is set to get a futuristic overhaul with the creation of a multi-billion-dollar eco-complex. The Gate residence will be built in the city's Heliopolis district and include 1,000 apartments. It claims to be so energy efficient it'll generate savings of between 50 and 70%. Also in the news this week, a company in Nigeria is using old shipping containers to build houses. It's a new concept in engineering, and the company behind it says it could bring down housing costs and see projects finishing quicker. Important steps forward for Africa, where in so many countries the enormous size of urban populations is growing so fast. So, well, let's talk about the way that housing is developing across the continent. Two innovative schemes aimed at creating new housing stock in Nigeria and Egypt. In general terms, shortage of good housing, is this a problem for African countries?
It is
big.
A
Massive problem.
Massive.
Okay.
And the challenge that we have is that even though every day there are new projects coming up, new houses being built in Abuja, in Cairo, and those places, most of those houses, 85%, if not 90%, are not affordable for the general working class people. So even though those houses are coming up, the number of people are not able to actually afford to live in those houses.
So who's buying them?
The rich and mighty. And that goes far back. I can actually speak about Nigeria, where there was a time, if you remember, Topper, when we had, it was called affordable housing. But of course, people couldn't afford it. So I was wondering why they're calling it affordable housing when it's not affordable. A person is all back again to the corruption, you know, that goes on within government, and that goes on within civil servants, because people forget that when you say government, it's not just the politicians. Without the civil servants working in cahoots with politicians, these things will not get done.
But what we're seeing across the continent is a growth in the urban populations. We're seeing people moving away from the land and moving into cities. Well, they've got to live somewhere, and if all the building is being done for the rich people, well, where are all these people going into the city?
They live in slums. Sometimes they live out of their vehicles, under bridges, sheds. It's there. And the cameras, you see them there.
And the strategy is that most of the rich are the ones buying out the houses and then renting them out. So
exorbitantly.
With high price rents. No.
But it's not all bad news, though, is it? This company that was using shipping containers to build houses, they build them quicker and build them cheaper. So there's an entrepreneurial push that sees a need there, sees a market there for affordable housing, and seems to be trying to meet it.
And that's not just the only one. There are different concepts that are springing up. I think the challenge now is acceptability of those new concepts, because many people are still rooted in the ideology of having a house that is brick and concrete, you know, on the ground. You know, I know that in Nigeria they use mud and cement mixed up. So there are loads of different initiatives. I believe it's a great concept, and I hope that if embedded within the strategy, if the leadership buy into it, is a good way of increasing opportunity for many people to own their homes.
Princess, you want to say something?
Yes, I actually believe that the leadership from the local government level need to understand what social housing really means. I have a feeling that they don't even know what that concept is. Social housing that is affordable and sustainable.
So even though we see hundreds of thousands of people moving out of the countryside into cities, you think that the government civil servants don't see these people, don't see where they're going to have to live?
No, and they don't care. Unfortunately, it's the bitter truth.
See, you do wonder, though, that this is sort of storing up problems for the future.
Oh, we've already seen it.
The urbanization strategy,
explosion.
It's not actually aligned. You know, they're planning for roads, they're planning for water taps, they're planning for railways. But when you talk about the housing aspect, they're leaving it to what they call the private-public partnership initiative to build houses and then for people to rent. But what then happens, or people to buy, but people can't buy because you're talking of countries where the mortgage rate is not the kind of mortgage rate that we're used to in the Western world.
There's no mortgage, actually.
And that's another endemic problem. But we talk about the need for housing and building houses, and building houses that are energy efficient, fine. But so many countries across the continent, Nigeria and South Africa amongst them, have bigger problems just keeping the lights on, maintaining a stable power supply. So how do we, I mean, is that indicative of bigger problems in making housing a priority?
It's a case of, in the abundance of water, the fool is thirsty. That's the problem.
Okay. So how do we translate that into public policy?
That's the problem we have. Basically, they need to go back to the drawing board. Find out who are the entrepreneurs, the private business owners that can bring in sustainable and affordable housing. Because don't forget, there's something about cement. I can talk about Nigeria. Cement is highly priced. And there are certain people who are given licenses to import cement. If you want to build your house with mud or something else, your house you might even get an approval.
All right. Again, we're talking about going back to this endemic corruption. And tell me, Sophie, where are you on this?
I think one of the things that need to be done is about helping the policy writers to really understand that there are different innovative approaches that could be adopted, building new cities. People don't really need to move into the urban area alone in order to be able to. If you build new cities and you provide a route into the city, then it will help to decongest the real urban area that people are dreaming of going into.
And then you get passengers for all these railways that they're building.
Exactly.
It all works very well.
And we still have waterways that don't get used.
Thank you for now. Time for another very short break there, but when we come back, we'll take a look at some of the many positive stories coming out of Africa this week, stories selected by my guests.
Thinking of banking in Africa? Then think Zenith, one of the biggest in Nigeria, with assets over $16 billion, listed among the 20 most influential brands in the world, and winner of Best Bank in Corporate Governance. The most customer-focused bank in Nigeria, a success built on 3 foundations, dedicated to people, technology, service. Zenith Bank, in your best interest.
Welcome back to Talking Africa here on Arise News. Now, each week we ask our guests to highlight some of the positive stories that have come out of Africa which have caught their eye in the last 7 days. We'll start with you, Temi Tope. This is the story of a journalist in Burundi. The streets of Burundi lit up with celebrations this week at the news that Bob Rugurika had been freed on bail. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, Bob is a journalist who works in a radio station, and there was the killing of 3 nuns, and I think his radio station actually broadcasted some stories around it and some of the confessions, and it was picked up, conspiracy to murder and things like that, and it was locked up. Now, the people were not really happy with the way the government had handled that case. So, and there's been a lot of pressure on government. So when he was released on bail, the whole country, just went hysterical. Everybody was jubilant. Burundi is the second poorest country, at least in Africa, if not.
I mean, this is quite a broadcast, though. I mean, he broadcast the alleged confession of a man who claimed to have killed 3 nuns.
Yes.
There was also talk of this man claiming to have been acting on the orders of senior intelligence officials.
Yes, and I think what people deduced from the whole scenario is that the government is trying to cover up the whole issue and lock this innocent man up. So when he was released, as usual, the whole place just went hysterical.
He's still going to face trial, though, isn't he?
Yes, he's still going to face trial, but I think the government will try and wriggle out of all this because this is bad press for them. It's something that they have to manage. The whole society came out. It's as if, you know, it's Independence Day, more or less, everybody dancing on top of cars and people shouting and screaming, you know. This guy is a national hero as far as the people are concerned.
And the case also highlighted the importance of this radio station in Burundi, what is it called? Radio Publique Africaine.
Yes, it is.
The voice of the voiceless. Why? Who are the voiceless?
The voiceless are the people, the community that listen to it. It's like a kind of a talk show. People listening to this radio station, it has a lot of followers. So when this news broke that somebody had actually, you know, in fact, the Catholic Church actually said they believe it's an armed robbery that had gone wrong because the person that was involved must have had maybe unstable. But the government, unhappy with the way the whole incident went, you know, turned it around and held this individual or journalists who, you know, the people were not just happy with the way they went about it.
We'll continue with the theme of popular protest for our next story. Princess Diane, you've highlighted something of interest to you, which is youth activism in African politics, particularly the differences between South Africa's politically engaged youth and Nigeria's. First, tell us what it is that you admire about South Africa's engaged population, young population.
We obviously saw when we started the show, the young man in Parliament, and who, without being rude to His Excellency the President, he still told him what he needed to hear, to much applause. If that were to happen in my native country, Nigeria, that young man would not be seen again, most likely. He could be arrested, locked up, and even youths like him would condemn him and say, how dare you, talk to His Excellency the President in such a manner.
So what's behind this? What is behind this impertinence? Is that the right word?
No, I think they're coming to their own. The youths in South Africa, they're getting clued up. They're getting very wise. We live in the 21st century. They know what should be and what shouldn't be. And they want to stand for that which is right, even if they stand alone. On the other hand, in Nigeria, it's not the same. The case is not the same. I was a politician from age 19. The things we could ask our political leaders, the chairman of the parties at that time, we could go up to them and ask them questions and make demands. In the 70s, I don't see anybody, doing that. Even when I was still a little bit connected in politics, in the 90s and most recently in 2011, you were asked to be very quiet. It was not the done thing or the said thing. And I'm asking, why can't people ask questions? If you don't ask questions, you never get any answers.
Well, let's talk about your country, Nigeria, in the middle of a very highly contested election, too close to call, everyone is saying. A long way from the old days of military autocracy.
I'm not sure.
Oh, really?
I'm not sure we're away from military autocracy. I'm not sure. The military has a hand in all the pies. You just have to look very closely.
So do you think that the military has a hand in both of these pies?
I'm a child of the 70s, and when I started working television, the military were in charge. I've not seen much difference, really, apart from the fact that it changes from uniform to, civilian wear. Look at both political parties, the main political parties, retired general this, retired brigadier that, from the very grassroots right up.
And what about the engagement of the youth in these political campaigns? Every day that we've covered the election, you see young people front and centre, and you hear political messages being delivered to them from both of the main contenders.
Because they now know, obviously, that the youth are empowered. The youth are not waiting for the political leaders to empower them. They have gone ahead and seized their own power. They've decided to say, you know what, this is our life. But unfortunately, back again to hunger, to lack, things that should be there that are not there. So people get swayed. So instead of standing for that which is right and still stand alone because it's right, they'd rather bend to pressure and sort of go with somebody that they know would not really get them to the promised land, but maybe will get them a bag of rice or a tube of yam.
Okay, well, plenty of that. Not just Africa has, or indeed Nigeria has that problem. Plenty of that over in Europe as well. Temitope, let's turn to you now. You flagged up an unusual story from Egypt.
Yes.
A precious Egyptian artefact that's sold for £52,000 at auction. This bronze cat, was thought to be 2,500 years old, was rescued from a house clearance in West Cornwall in the southwest of the UK. It actually narrowly avoided being thrown in a skip. Tell us about it.
It's a story of a 26 dynasty, cat, who says cat can be sold for a large price. But the good news from here is that this is an artifact that has been dated back to 200 or 500 BC, which somebody was just about to throw into the skip and was rescued, and now is fetching such a lot of money. And looking at the turmoil going on in Egypt, and the fact that they have this kind of artifact being sold in another part of the world for such a lot of money, and we have people in Egypt that have nothing, but it brings joy that these kind of things, there's still lots to be discovered in Egypt, and if only they could just get their acts together, get things back, and tourism go back, it's a good story.
I can't help seeing the downside of this stuff, because I think the artifact may well have belonged to Howard Carter, who discovered Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922.
Yeah.
So we have an artifact plundered from Egypt, taken to the UK, where it sells for lots of money, where had it been left where it is, I don't know what would have happened. I don't know where the good news in this is, aside from it having not been destroyed.
The good news is that it's not been destroyed, and I'm quite sure that the money will go into a bit of it will go into good cause.
You think so?
We can hope.
We hope so. But again, the good news is that at the end of the day, with all the stories of death and things, a cat has been rescued and sold for a lot of money, and but it shows the potential in Africa in terms of the artifacts that we have. And if people could just sit down and map out, in terms of our artwork and the things that we have, there's a lot of hope for Africa.
Okay. Now, Princess Diane, you've another positive note you'd like to end on. Your charity, Girl Child Network, making great gains in your campaigning for women's rights in Africa and the diaspora. And you've had a celebratory event here in London at Lambeth, featuring several big names. Tell us about this.
The Girl Child Network Worldwide was set up actually by a young Zimbabwean woman who herself had gone through being raped at age 6, her mother dying in domestic violence when she was 9. So she ended up starting this in a classroom on her own when she graduated and became a teacher. And she went on to become the CNN top hero in 2009. That was before I came on board in 2010 as the chair. And I've just been following, the large steps that we've been able to achieve with the girls that we've rescued. Some when they were like age 10, age 9, and now they're in their 20s in America. Graduates, one of them beat Obama's record because she went to Obama's university, and she's landed herself a fantastic job. Quite a number of them are here in the UK, and they're...
Give us an example. Tell us an example that's particularly stuck in your mind.
Oh, Esther Saidi. Esther Saidi was a twin, an orphan, in a village called Chitungwiza in Zimbabwe, and she had a grandmother who unfortunately was blind. And somebody contacted our organization and said, there's a young girl who is very clever, and she would really gain from your organization. So Mujari Betty Makoni, who set up the organization, drove to the little village and picked this young girl up. Today, Esther Saidi has graduated, and she's in DC. She's got a job now with KP Morgan, doing very well. Quite a number of people actually want her. There's another one who is in Atlanta, Georgia, who's become a pharmacist. Then we have loads of them here in the UK. We can't name them also because of some security reasons, because they escaped.
Good work.
And they're doing very well.
Thank you so much. And if you want to find out more about the work of Princess Diana's charity, you'll see the web address on screen now. Thanks to Temitope Alode and Princess Diana. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
And also our thanks to the historian and author Michael Burleigh for his contribution this week. We're back every night with Africa Wrap at 1800 GMT here on Arise News. From me, Phil Gale, and from the entire team here in London, goodbye. Thanks for watching.